You are still watching the morning call here on Africanews. Now we head to Uganda and our second leading story. The President, Yoweri Museveni, began a 6-day march through the jungle on Saturday to retrace the steps of his guerrilla forces when they seized power 3 decades ago. Museveni is one of Africa's longest ruling leaders. He seized power in 1986 after taking part in rebellions to end the rule of Idi Amin and Milton Obote, and is expected to seek a 6th term in office in the elections due in 2021, Bridget.
Now,
75 years, Yoweri Museveni is the only president most Ugandans know. In a country where 1 out of every 2 residents is under 16 years of age, for the opposition, this march is nothing more than the beginning of a hidden electoral campaign with a view to the 2021
And now, to find out more, we are joined by Africanews senior journalist Ronald Kato, who joins us on the line. Thank you so much for joining us on the program, Ronald. So tell us, why is President Museveni marching?
Well, officially the march is to commemorate one of the fiercest battles that Mr. Museveni fought during the war that brought him to power. For our international audience, Museveni took power in Uganda in 1986 by overthrowing the government of the day after a rebellion that took 5 years. So the march is to retrace the steps that he took along with his fighters through central Uganda. Along the route of the trek, he's been meeting people and briefly chatting with them. He has walked past homes of veterans, many of whom have since passed on, to talk to their families and acknowledge the role they played in the Bush War. But unofficially, it is election year next year in Uganda. So the president is using this time to mobilize and re-energize his base ahead of what promises to be a grueling campaign. He's been handing over envelopes to people cheering him as he walks on his trek. The other thing is that he wants to grab as much media attention as possible. He wants to dominate the headlines at a time when there is not so much activity going on politically. So he's really in campaign mode, but won't say it because officially no campaigns are allowed yet. His rivals have been stopped from organizing, so he's keen on using this time to steal as much attention as possible. There's also lots of talk calling him a revolutionary at the moment. In terms of the optics, he is 75 years old and worries quite a lot about his age. So the whole campaign is to try and portray him as energetic and fit to rule. He's keen to be looked at as the 40-year-old that led rebel troops in the jungles of central Uganda to overthrow a government in the 1980s.
Yoweri Museveni is always quick to mention 1986, the year he took power, in his speeches. He made reference to it again during this march. What memories does this date evoke for Ugandans?
Well, not so much. He mentions 1986 to try and show how much progress and transformation Uganda has seen under his rule. But he misses the picture, at least demographically, because many Ugandans are just 35 or under. So many figures say over 75% are under 35. So these are people that were not yet born when Mr. Museveni took power or were simply babies. The 1986 message does not speak to them. They want to go with people who speak the language they speak, people who understand the dynamics of living in a social media generation and things like that. So this march is also to reenact things that happened before 1986, but the internet savvy generation of young men and women are barely impressed. If anything, it will only earn Mr. Museveni points among veterans and old voters, people who lived in the days that he normally talks about.
Now, Ronald, you talk about the fact that next year is an election year. So if Museveni contests, he'll be running for a 6th time. How different will 2021 be from all the other previous races he's contested in?
I think there won't be much difference because the conditions on the ground remain pretty much the same. He has refused to effect electoral reforms as ordered by the courts. and the constitution remains incredibly weak at this point in time. Maybe the only change is that he has to deal with two equally powerful opponents, and that's Bobi Wine and Kizza Besigye. But the laws that gag opposition parties and stop opponents from mobilizing are pretty much still being enforced. So it is still very much a one-man show. The other issue is that there is so much discontent. Ugandans are still angry that he broke the constitution to remove the age limit to be able to contest again. People are also mad about the high rates of crime and corruption. But Mr. Museveni is very much aware of this anger, and his security forces have doubled down on brutality in recent months. They use extraordinary force to break up protests and have shot and killed protesters in some instances. So he'll be dispensing a very high dose of brutality and violence going into this election year.